Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of the Pembrokeshire Murders, aka the Coastal Murders, aka the Bullseye Killer. You take your pick. Let's go. Sin and Tonic! I literally was going to just say about the weather, and then I realised that is like one of those it's so British, isn't it? Like the British always talk about the weather. And I literally was sitting here thinking, just tell them about the weather. I mean, does anybody care? Is it interesting? I don't know. There must be a reason we always talk about it. Maybe because it's so shy. I don't know. Anyway, this story takes us to Pembrokeshire in Wales. And it's very rural and coastal, very pretty, and very safe. In the 80s, it was actually deemed the safest place to live in the UK until 1985. And then it all went terribly wrong for Pembrokeshire, sadly. Let's begin on the 22nd of December in 1985. Just 3 days before Christmas, and I don't know why, because it's tragic whatever the time of year, whenever it is. But I always think when it's near Christmas or, Christmas, really? Like, really? Meant to be just the best time ever. Bad things happen all the time, but I don't like it when it's near Christmas. Christmas is very, very special to me, and I don't like it when bad things happen near Christmas. Cool, my tonic is so fizzy I can really hear it fizzing away. Can you hear it? Can you hear that? Fizzy. On the 22nd of December 1985, 3 days before Christmas, the emergency services were called to a huge house fire in the early hours, and that house belonged to siblings 52-year-old Helen and 58-year-old Richard Thomas. It was a beautiful building, very beautiful. I'll share a picture. Well, it floats my boat. And they had like 6 acres of land, 5 farms, the lot. It was a big old farmhouse with lots of land and lots of farms. And the land and the farms were maintained by Helen and Richard and other workers as well. So they had inherited the farm. It had gone down generations and it had been in the family since the 1920s. And Helen and Richard, they'd not married, they'd not had children. Helen had looked after her mother on the farm and in the farmhouse until she had passed away. And Richard had worked the land and worked on the farm as well. So a real family affair. They were very quiet. They kept themselves to themselves. They were quite reclusive. They had quite a small life. Helen converted books into Braille in her spare time. And Richard, he went out a little bit more than Helen did. He would be the one that would go to farmers markets and sell their cattle and things like that. And he was well liked. People liked him, well respected in the farming industry. So overall, just nice people. On the night of the 22nd, when the emergency services arrived, it would end up taking 5 hours to put the fire out. That's not good. The house was engulfed in flames. There was not much left of it at the end. It was just a shell, basically. And very, very sadly, when the fire was put out, it was worst case scenario, and they found the bodies of Helen and Richard. And this one gets spicy right early on, because Helen and Richard, they did not die from anything to do with this fire. Their bodies had gunshot wounds. Helen had been tied up, she'd been bound safe, and she had a bullet wound into her head, and Richard, he had a gunshot wound to his head as well. He wasn't bound. So the first thought that crossed the detectives' minds was that this was possibly a murder-suicide. Richard had gone potty and killed his sister and then killed himself after setting the house on fire in some fashion. Tragic. However, when the bodies were removed, taken for autopsy, they found a second gunshot wound on Richard's body, and this was in his abdomen, his tummy, and also an unexplained head injury. So, less likely now that this was a murder-suicide. Things are suspicious. The autopsy also showed that Richard had had a sexual encounter earlier on in the day with a man. So that's something to remember for now. Could it be a robbery gone wrong? This was the next thing on their minds. Had the robber thought that Helen was home alone? He tied her up, he was robbing the house, and then Richard came in, he interrupted him, and it ended badly for Helen and Richard. That was another possibility. So they're throwing loads of what if, they haven't got much evidence. The house is burnt to a crisp. There's nothing left. So it's a tricky case to cover, this one. They also discovered that the fire that was set, it was accelerated by diesel. So somebody had very purposefully set the house fire. The remaining Thomas family, they offered a reward for any information, and that proved fruitless, which was a shame. So the police then went about trying to trace the steps of Thomas and Helen that day, the day of the fire and their murder. Let's see what went down. Where did they go? What happened? They ascertained through witness statements that Helen had been at church that morning and Richard had been on the farm working with other farm workers. And then, as was usual, and I think this is so cute, they came home and they would lunch together, Helen and Richard, at about 12:30. Same thing every day. I think that's nice. Brother and sister, sharing a sarnie. Lovely. Cup of tea, little chat. How was church? How's the farm? How are the chickens? That sort of thing. I think that's really sweet. Love it. At 1:30, after their lunch, Richard then drove to a nearby town called Nayland. The police also knew, excuse me, itchy face, that Helen and Richard had been alive at 9 p.m. that night, because Helen had received a telephone call and somebody had spoken to her on the phone, and they were chatting away, and her and Richard, they were fine. They also knew from, they're so clever, science things that I don't know, but they worked out that the fire was set at around 10 p.m. So they knew that. So their murders must have been committed between when she put the phone down after her 9 p.m. phone call and around 10 o'clock. So quite a small window, really. They would then visit local people and ask, did you see anything between 9 and 10 on that day? Because they had this sort of small window, which, that's great actually, because you can probably pretty much remember I know exactly what I'm doing between 9 and 10. Every evening, I'm sitting down watching some crap on TV with a biscuit and a cup of tea. So, and if that was different, I would know, because I'd be like, oh yeah, didn't do that last night, we did this instead. Ooh. And you would think, oh, what was on TV? I could hear, did you hear anything, see anything? Oh yeah, we were watching such and such, and then we heard such and such. So, it's nice having a small window, is my point. Witnesses, they saw a blue Land Rover at about 10:10, driving very quickly and on the wrong side of the road. So, okay. During this time, the police are also talking to the locals in Nayland. Do you remember I said that that's where Richard went after his lunch? And there was a woman that came forward and she said, do you know what? I didn't see him on that day, but he was here once a week, every week without fail, and he would park his car on our road and I'd see it. And then a blue Land Rover would come and park, and Richard would leave his car and go and get in the lube Land Rover. What? The lube Land Rover? That's my brain doing some funny things, isn't it? He would then get in the blue Land Rover. Ooh, okay, this is now getting interesting, because it's what's going on with this blue Land Rover? They would then drive off together in the blue Land Rover, come back a bit later, okay? And the driver of the blue Land Rover was a man. The police wanted to find the owner of this blue Land Rover because, like I said earlier, it was in the autopsy they discovered that earlier in the day, Richard had had a sexual encounter with a man. So they're like, is the driver of the blue Land Rover his secret boyfriend? Or, they don't know, but they need to speak to this guy. They also got reports of a bearded man being around the farm on the very day before the murders. They happened at night. There was this man around the farmhouse during the daytime, bearded man. It's like, who is this guy? And witnesses also said that they saw the blue Land Rover at around 7 p.m. as well. This case went cold. It went cold, and there was no evidence, and they never found the bearded man and the blue Land Rover. 4 years later, moving on, there is another double murder. Very similar, but the two cases are not linked at this point. So another couple, but this time husband and wife, Pete and Gwenda Dixon. They were in their 50s, they'd been married for 22 years, they had grown-up children together, and they were on holiday in Pembrokeshire. They had been holidaying there for 12 years, they loved it, and they were very outdoorsy, and they liked going on long hikes. They loved it. And this was like just a spot that had captured them, and they went back every single year. June the 29th, 1989. Now, this is just sad and tragic. This was the final day of their 2-week holiday, the last day of a 2-week lovely holiday. And they were like, oh, should we just have one last walk? No, I don't think you should. One last walk. Honestly, sometimes it's just, they planned a big old hike. They knew where they would go. They were very familiar with all of the trails and the walks and everything like that because they'd been going for 12 years and they enjoyed their hiking. Before they left, they spoke to some other campers and they said what their plans were for that day. Their car was left, their tent was left, they were going to come back and pack it all up a bit later because it had rained. I think their tent was wet. So they were like, we'll go and have this one last walk and let it all dry and come back and go home later. So they left at 9:30 and they were due to come back at about 12:30, have a spot of lunch, clear up the tent. That was the plan, but they never returned. Obviously, a day or two later, when they didn't return home from their holiday as planned, their daughter and their son, they were concerned and they were worried. So they called the campsite. The owner of the campsite said, yeah, their car is still here, their tent is still here, it's all here, but I haven't actually seen them for a couple of days. Great. The police were called, they were reported missing, and the search would begin. They thought it was unlikely that this couple had gotten lost because they were very, very familiar with the walks and the areas, and it was a possibility, and they thought at the time that there had been some sort of terrible accident. They even looked at things like, had the couple possibly got on a train or, should we go somewhere and have a bit of an adventure? Unlikely, they'd left everything at the campsite, but they did look into their financials. Also, I forgot to mention, the walk that they had decided to take was a cliffside walk. So, dangerous. They tracked their cards. Like I said, they looked into their financials. And would you believe it? But Peter's card had actually been used in the town at 1:30 that day. So they were like, well, crikey, what's going on? And this is just beyond weird. So whoever had used the card had tried to withdraw £37. Right. Well, do we not all know, banks don't work like that, do they? The ATM machine thing does not work like that. It's in denominations of £5 or £10. Normally 10, I think now. I haven't got money out for a long time. But I think it's 10. I don't think you can get a fiver anymore. Anyway, so £37 computer says, no, thank you. Idiot, try again. So then they withdraw a tenner, £10. Why wouldn't they withdraw £40? If you wanted, whatever you did, you wanted £37, why wouldn't you then withdraw £40? So to me, at this point, I'm thinking, well, I know it's not Peter, spoiler alert, but whoever this is a sandwich short of a picnic, aren't they? So they've taken £10, 4 o'clock, same day, they have used the card at a different bank machine. What do you call it? Money machine. It's not that. What is it? It's not. It's not ATM. It's not the word. Cash point. Cash point. So they've gone to a different cash point to withdraw money, and this time took £100, and that's well, okay, £100. That to me isn't as stupid as £37, then take £10. I don't know what was going on there. We'll probably never know. But anyway, and the card was then used a couple of times over the next couple of days. The police asked for witnesses on that day, 1:30. Again, they've got a nice sturdy number. What were you doing at 1:30? So they're like, 1:30. What was going on? Did anyone see anyone taking money out of this cash point? And someone did. And they described that person, and they did not describe Peter. So it's not looking good for Peter and Gwenda. That eyewitness would then describe the person they saw, and a sketch was made. Now, this sketch is important, so we'll remember that as well. In their search, the police started to use sniffer dogs to see if they could find anything, and they did, and they found the bodies of Peter and Gwenda. They were not far off of the cliffside walk, and I'll share a picture. The cliffside walk is like that, but it's not just like a cliff edge. There's sort of like terrain and trees and bushes and things down the side before you would get to like the edge of the cliff. Both of them had been shot in the face, and Peter had been shot twice more, once in the chest and once in the back. Gwenda was still away up in the sort of wooded area, and she was partially undressed from the waist down, and Peter was sort of found further down, like sort of hanging over the cliff edge, and his wallet and his wedding ring were gone. So now the hunt is on for this guy that was seen at the cash point, because it's very likely that he was the perpetrator. He must have also demanded the PIN number from Peter, and that is possibly why Peter had other gunshot wounds. It was thought that the murder itself was premeditated, but the victims were not. So it was by chance that it was Peter and Gwenda, and that the perpetrator had almost lied in wait and ambushed them. But what's the motive for that? Was the motive robbery, and the shootings were, did Peter sort of almost overpower him, and so he did kill them? Or they didn't know, but it was a scary thought to think that somebody had just come out that day just to kill somebody. It's at this point in the case that the police actually had their first breakthrough, and they got a person of interest called John Cooper. He was from southwest Wales, and effectively he was dobbed in. A local pawnbroker had said, I had someone come in, John, and they pawned their wedding ring, or a wedding ring. Now, that's not unusual. People used to do that. Maybe they still do all the time for a bit of money. But he just thought, he'd seen it on the news, and he was like, someone did come in this week with a wedding ring, man's wedding ring. So I'm going to report it. Well done, that man. So they got John Cooper in, and they had a little chat. And he just said it was his wedding ring, and he was just pawning it for extra money. And there was no reason to question that, or, nothing iffy about that. Like I say, that is perfectly legitimate, and there was no way to prove it was or it wasn't his ring. So that just ended up proving a bit of a dead end, actually. 18 months later, nothing's going on. No movement. It's now a cold case. Both murders were featured on something called Crime Watch. And I used to watch this all the time. I used to watch this just before bed, which is just mad because they're real cases. And I was quite young. I was young. I was like a kid. I lived at home with my parents, and I'd have it on the telly, and it would be things like this, which are quite and not only are they really sad and tragic, but the perpetrator is still out there. Do you know what I mean? So it's oh, I'll just watch that. Night, sweet dreams. What? I can't believe I did that. Now I have to make sure that, at least an hour or so before bed is fluffy bunnies and stuff like that, because I can't cope with it. I'll just have it in my head all the time. But yeah, I used to just night. What? Anyway, both of the cases were featured on Crime Watch. Maybe I even saw them. But they were both featured separately because, like I said, they were not linked. They were 4 years apart, and they were similar but different. I mean, the first murders were committed as a home invasion in the night, and then the house was set on fire. And these murders were still with a shotgun, but they were outside during the morning, and there was a robbery as well. So, yeah, not a stretch to see how they weren't linked. 7 years later, and 11 years after the murder of Richard and Helen Thomas, we come to March of 1996. 6 teenagers are walking through a field, and they come across a masked man. So all black clothing and a black ski mask and a shotgun. He made them all lie on the floor face down while he shot bullets up into the air. That's just so scary, isn't it? Poor things. He then went on to sexually assault one of the girls and rape another. So what a traumatic event for those teenagers just out there, just living their life. It's just sad, isn't it? He then robbed them all and left. Piece of shit. There was no CCTV. They're in the middle of a freaking field. There was no real description because he was wearing all black and had his face covered. So not a ton of evidence again. However, they did have DNA because he had sexually assaulted and raped the 2 of the girls. And this was then the beginning of a reign of terror in the area. Just mad. I'm talking you would want to move. You'd be like, we've got to get out of here. We've got to sell up. We've got to go. Over 60 home invasions and robberies would then occur over the next few years. So this guy was just like a train, just destruction. Always the same, black outfit, black ski mask and a shotgun. And he always wore gloves. This was horrific. I mean, it would be horrific anywhere, but it was so shocking. This had been the safest place to live in the whole of the UK. So, that's mad, isn't it? He must have just been yeah, screw that. No. And the police had nothing to go on. It was a bit there was just no, he wasn't leaving any evidence. And what do you do? Watch every house? It's impossible, isn't it? He just got away with it for a long time. And then he broke into a local teacher's house. Same thing, black ski mask, shotgun. I think it was a sawn-off shotgun. Is that just a shotgun with a short barrel? I should Google that. I should know that, but I don't. And I think it is because obviously a shotgun's that, isn't it? Really long and probably quite cumbersome. So I'm thinking it's one of the ones where I think that's what it means. Google, sawn-off shotgun. A sawn-off shotgun is a type of shotgun with a shorter gun barrel, typically under 18 inches. Fabulous. Right, there we go. Moving on. So, he's in this teacher's house. He's tied her up and he's robbing her. Terrible. At gunpoint. And she manages to get herself free. Oh, I love things like that, don't you? Just yes. She managed to get herself free, and how brave, because he does have a gun. She manages to sound her alarm, her house alarm. So everyone, they're loud, aren't they? Whoa, you know about it. And he was he fled. He's off skis, and she's she's okay. The police were there quick as a flash because this guy's just, he's rampaging. And they search the immediate area because, he's fled, but let's have a quick look around. And they find some stuff in a bush. A couple of roads away, they find some bits and bobs, which include the gun, the ski mask, and gloves. So this implied to the police that this man was local, because otherwise he would have just hopped into his getaway car and been out of there. The fact that he sort of got a couple of roads away and got rid of this stuff, made it seem like he got away on foot. He was on foot. So they think this guy is local. He's local. He didn't want to get caught with the stuff he's got on him. So he ditched it and then more than likely probably casually sort of walked home, maybe with a bit of a spring in his step. They start interviewing quickly. They start interviewing the people in that local area, house to house, door to door. They're like, let's speak to everyone. And one guy really stood out, very much so. And this guy had 2 sawn-off shotguns, yes, 2, and upon searching the property, they found many, many, many items that had been stolen and hundreds of house keys. So if that is not suspicious, then what? Come on. So instantly, this guy is number 1 suspect, 100%. And guess who he is? Mr. John fricking Cooper. The same guy that had pawned off his wedding ring previously, years ago. What the hell? They had lots of evidence now that Mr. John Cooper was the perpetrator of many, many break-ins. Likely they've got the guy, they've caught him. He had lots of the stolen. His house was basically full of stolen goods. Now I just can't say that word. No. And the guns and DNA, and he was tied to 30 of the 60 break-ins. They had no evidence that he was connected to anything else, but the police had their suspicions. And he ended up getting 16 years in prison for the armed robberies that he was connected to. They opened cold cases and went through DNA and forensics, because obviously a lot of time has passed and these things improve all the time, don't they? They also interviewed every single person, every single soul that knew John Cooper. They wanted to really get in there and know everything about him. Turned out that Cooper was very social. He enjoyed the pub an awful lot. He enjoyed darts and gambling. Too much gambling. And he had a wife called Patricia. They'd met in their 20s and got married quite quickly and had 2 kids. They had a son and a daughter. And that was his family setup. It wasn't very nice though, because behind closed doors, he was just a tyrant. In the pub, he was larger than life, funny, loved a flirt, flirted with all the ladies, and just a real character. Oh, John, a bit like that. Oh, good old John. But at home, it was a very different story. He was very aggressive towards his son and his wife, and his poor son, he just paints such a dark picture of his childhood, and I just always find that just so horrible. These kids that just have just crap, they just get dealt such a crappy card, don't they? He was a massive gambler, and the trouble was, you don't win all the time, do you? In fact, you lose more than you win. And when he would lose, he would come home and he would take that out violently on his son and his mum. His son has a really horrific memory of his dad holding a shotgun to his son's head, when he was 11 years old. This is the sort of man I'm talking about. This paints the perfect picture of the guy I'm talking about, okay? This story right here. He's a pleasant guy then. Unsurprisingly, his son left home as soon as he could, and the armed robberies began around this time. There is a reason for this, and that is because Cooper did love a gamble, like I said, and he would play the lottery, and there was a game called Spot the Bull. Now, he played this game before any of the murders had taken place, and he won that game. So my nan and granddad used to play that game. It's a picture of football players on the field, and the ball has been removed. So you have to put a cross where you think the ball should be in that picture, and then you win money if you win. And he won big. He won a lot of money, and he lived it up. He spent a lot of that money on gambling, to be fair, but he got used to just having money in his pocket, and they went on holidays and yada yada. He spent his money, he just spent it, but he spent it and it was gone, and he wanted to still have that lifestyle that he'd been accustomed to with winning this big lump of money. So what do? Start robbing people. And then 2 weeks before Peter and Gwenda's murders, John Cooper went on a show called Bullseye. Now, my dad used to watch this all the time, and it was like a game show, and it was all darts, so you played darts and Bully wins prizes, something like that, and then at the end you won cash or cars, and always like a speedboat, random caravan, stuff like that. People loved all that. It was on the show Bullseye that he made comments about Pembrokeshire and the fact that there were many coastal walks, and he enjoyed that and things like that. Just eerie because, it was eerie. And also he was on television, so, this would come in handy later on. While his endeavours started out as, the motive was money, he'd had that big windfall, and when it was gone, it triggered something in his mind, and this is why he started home invasions, robberies, armed robberies, and, it was all about money. He wanted money, he wanted to have that lifestyle. And then it changed, and actually his motive became power as well. He would be increasingly violent with his victims during the armed robberies, and, we also know, incredibly violent and murderous. The police interviewed him, of course they did, and in his first interview he is a real stroppy little what's-it, like a right stroppy child. You can watch the footage of it and he's just won't even look at them, just oh my gosh, a bird was then just trying to fly in. That would have scared me if the door was open. Really stroppy, petulant child he looks like. And then the second interview, they changed up their tactics a little bit. They had a really big man, a bit intimidating, and then a really quietly spoken, soft-spoken woman, and they hoped that it would get him to talk a bit. He did, but he didn't give them any information really. He was quite careful about what he would say, and also he was weird as hell. He took notes in his own interviews. They'd be chatting away and just write that down. Idiot. I mean, why? What? What are you trying to... Shut up. Just weird. Note-taking. That's bizarre, isn't it? And then, he was, questioning them. Where did you find the shotgun in the bush? What bush? What bush are you talking about? Which bush? Where? Just shush. Shut up. Just annoying. I don't know how the police do it, because I'd just be like... Really would want to clip him, wouldn't you? January of 2009, and Cooper's released from prison. He'd been given 16 years for his robberies, armed robberies, and now he's out. They never managed to get evidence about, connecting him to anything else. So this is a shocking part of the story, because you're just So he's out. Not long after he's out, his wife dies. And it's weird and suspicious at first. She dies in bed, next to him, and, calls the ambulance, whatever. And the police bring him in because they're desperate to get him. They really think that he's done worse than his robberies. So they question him about the death of his wife, but during the autopsy, it is found that there was no foul play. And basically, she had some issue with her heart, and her heart had swollen to the size of a football. What? How does that even happen? Do you know what I mean? That kept me up at night. Like I said, they really thought that he had something to do with these murders. So they decided to go back over evidence, and so clever. What they did is they realised, we've got a sketch of this man at the cash point, right? ATM cash point. But we've also got footage of him at around that same year, because it was only 2 weeks before they were murdered that he was on Bullseye. Okay, so what? So what they did was they got the footage of Bullseye and they rewatched it, and they sort of stopped it. I'll share a picture if I can find one of him at a certain angle similar to the sketch. And it's uncanny. The shape of his hair, just everything about it is oh my God, that's the same person. I always find that just fascinating, how they draw a sketch from just what someone has said. Honestly, find that fascinating. Anyway, so it basically looks like the same person. On the back of this, they went to his house to have a search. They were like, let's search his house. He must have just been so bored of it by now, like, oh, what now? They wanted to find clothes that were similar, and I find this mad, to what he was wearing on that day. Now that was in 1989, the murder of Peter and Gwenda, right? 1989, and we're now in 2009. Let's do maths. 1999. So 20 years later, I would think that's a stretch. Will he have kept clothes from 20? Oh, my dad does, to be fair. And lo and behold, they found a pair of shorts that looked incredibly similar to the ones that he was wearing in the sketch, right? This blew my mind. And they sent them off for forensic testing. When that testing came back, it blows my mind. They found the blood of Peter Dickinson on those shorts. They were the blimmin' shorts that he had worn 20 years earlier when he had killed Peter and Gwenda. What are the chances of that? Oh, honestly, they arrested him, they took him in for questioning, and they wanted him to say, yeah, they're my shorts. They hadn't told him what they'd found on them, but they wanted him to be like, yeah, they're my shorts, and what? So they could be like, well, actually, mate, we got ya. But he tripped himself right up, because when presented with said shorts and the sketch and all the information, the police were like, yeah, look at this, got ya. He was like, what are you talking about? Those shorts are too short. They're too short. And the police were like, whatever, come on. But he said it like a bunch of times, like over and over, and he was obsessed with the fact that the shorts that were in front of him, the shorts that they'd sent off to forensics, were shorter than in the sketch. Now, to me, I'd be like, well, the sketch, the man, the eyewitness might have got the length of your shorts blooming wrong, so shush. But the police, it intrigued them, the fact that he was so, hung up on the fact that the shorts were short. So they sent those shorts back again to the forensics and said, would you mind? Can you have a look at the seam and unpick it and tell us whether those shorts have been taken up, made shorter? Because he keeps banging on about this. And, interestingly, wifey is like a seamstress. The forensics come back, and yes, those shorts had been taken up. So he tripped himself up, because it's like, all right, yeah, the shorts that we're looking at today are too short, but they've been altered. When you wore them on the day that you killed Peter and Gwenda, they were longer. So thanks for that. And also, get this, something else. On unpicking the shorts and finding out that they were in fact altered, they found more DNA in the hemline. And this was, get this was the DNA of Peter and Gwenda's daughter. So what? John Cooper had been nowhere near their daughter, nowhere at all. And then it was like, oh my God. So he had taken Peter's shorts out of his rucksack and worn them that day. So he'd murdered Peter and then taken his shorts as some sort of sick trophy and walked around and got money out with his card and all like that on the day. It's just mind-blowing. Cooper stooped low now. Yeah, he was like, damn it. And he was like, well, okay, whatever. But, it was my son. My son used to take my clothes all the time. He must have done this. He must have committed the murders, not me. No. Just vile. Vile man. Already not done enough to your son, have you? Trying to throw him under the bus for murder? Git. Anyway, they then were doing lots of tests and forensics on other things that they'd found, one of which was a gun that belonged to Cooper, and they believed that this certain gun had been used to kill the Dickinsons, and it had been painted black, the whole gun. So they removed the paint, and it had been painted because it was covered in the Dickinsons' blood. So they really had strong connections tying him to Peter and Gwenda's murders. Not so much so, unfortunately, with Richard and Helen, the siblings. So they really, really started digging deep here. They were like, we need to get him for this because we think it's him, definitely. And unbelievably, this case, like, whoa, so many things are like, what, how, what, heck, eh? They managed to find, they went back and looked over the clothing and things like that from the very first case, and they found fibres from Richard's socks on one of Cooper's gloves. What are the chances of that? This is like 25 years later. And they even found, and this I like this as well because all the little dots are connected in this case now, fibres from his clothing, Cooper's clothing, in the underwear of one of the girls that he sexually assaulted in, with the shotgun when he made them all lie down. So he's now connected to all 3 of those cases, as well as he's already served his time for 30 of those home invasions, but they've now got him on murder, two double murders. So yes, please. In 2011, John Cooper was convicted of all 4 murders, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Good job. He launched an appeal later that year, which was denied and rejected, and yes, good. And that concludes the story. But doesn't it feel like such a, whoa. I couldn't believe some parts of that. Just how things, it felt, I don't know, lucky almost. That some things kind of fell into place there. Although, evidence doesn't lie, does it? But it's all too well known that old cases especially, a lot of evidence can be lost and, or inadmissible, and in this case, that didn't happen. It felt like there was a stroke of luck behind some of the things there. Thank you so much for joining me today for another episode of Sin and Tonic. I do hope you can join me next week for another true crime story and a mug or a glass or a jar or a vase of gin. Bye! Oh, I was going to show you the dog. The dog. One sec. You're so ginormous, dog. Can you say hello? Say hello. Can you say hello? Look. Can you see him? Be friendly. Are you beautiful?